The sun had only just cleared the jagged Nevada mountains, but heat was already rising off the desert floor in shimmering waves. The proving grounds were awake, humming with a mixture of machinery, radio chatter, and the faint thrum of generators buried in sand-colored housings. This was a place few civilians had ever seen, a classified stretch of earth where nations quietly tested the weapons that would decide future wars. Brigadier General Harland Westfield cut across the tarmac like a man who owned the sun itself. His uniform gleamed, chest heavy with medals that caught the light, each step measured and confident. Behind him trailed 6 defense contractors in tailored suits, their shoes unsuited for the grit and dust. Each carried the same slim tablet, displaying the pride of their consortium, the Atlas targeting system. 7 years in the making. $2 billion in funding. Every face in that entourage bore the same smug certainty that today would cement their legacy. "Gentlemen," Westfield called, voice carrying easily over the dry morning air. "Today marks the end of human error in battlefield precision. We're here to witness the moment machines finally surpass the best our species can offer." To the cluster of senior officials gathered under a shaded canopy, it was a statement of fact. To him, it was prophecy. On the outer fringe of the assembly, unnoticed by most, sat a lone figure. She wore standard-issue fatigues stripped of rank insignia, a plain visitor badge hanging from her collar like an afterthought. Her boots were scuffed, her uniform sun-faded. In her lap lay an old wooden-stocked rifle, its surface worn smooth by decades of hands. Specialist Laurie Thorne might have been mistaken for a museum volunteer sent here by mistake. A junior officer approached awkwardly, holding out a laminated badge marked Logistics Observer. "You'll need to keep this on you at all times, ma'am," he said, giving the rifle a puzzled glance. Laurie took it without looking up, clipped it to her shirt, and went back to her quiet, methodical cleaning. Every movement was deliberate. A patch drawn through the bore, the click of a brass oil tin opening, a careful rotation of the bolt assembly. The rifle's lack of modern features, no optics, no polymer stock, no rails for attachments, only made it seem more out of place amid the polished chrome and advanced optics scattered across the firing line. Colonel Atticus Meacham, standing apart from the other officers, noticed her. His face was carved into weathered lines from decades in the field, but his eyes remained sharp. When Laurie finally glanced up, his gaze met hers for a fraction of a second. It wasn't recognition exactly, more like the prickling awareness of seeing something you'd heard about but never expected to encounter in daylight. Westfield's voice rolled over the group again, drawing them back to the demonstration. "The Atlas system," he said, gesturing grandly toward the centerpiece of the range, "removes the final, unreliable element in combat, the human trigger puller." Mounted on a gleaming, robotic platform, Atlas was more than a rifle. It was an integrated weapon brain. Every variable, wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, barrel harmonics, was fed into a calculation engine that could process them faster than human thought. It compensated for pulse tremors, microsecond delays in reaction, even the shooter's breathing cycle. With a subtle nod from Westfield, the first demonstration began. Targets popped into view across the valley at various distances. Atlas pivoted, locked, and fired without hesitation. At 2,000 meters, with a crosswind strong enough to rattle the viewing stands, its shot vaporized the target. The system operator announced the result in a clipped tone. Target acquired, neutralized. Acquisition time, 1.3 seconds. The dignitaries murmured appreciatively. A silver-haired senator in a tailored blue suit smiled faintly, already rehearsing the speech he'd give to Congress about the dawn of a new era. Meacham, however, wasn't watching the robots. His eyes kept drifting toward Laurie. She'd finished with her rifle now, and sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her knees. It wasn't boredom. It was the stillness of a predator waiting for the right moment. When Westfield called for a short recess, Meacham intercepted him with a quiet urgency. "General, a word." Westfield looked mildly irritated, but allowed himself to be drawn aside. "The Observer," Meacham said. "I've seen her name in certain restricted files. Operation Thistledown." Westfield frowned. "Thistledown?" That's an old ghost story. Unverified field reports out of Syria, Yemen. Not just stories, Meachum interrupted. Protocol says any qualified marksman present should be given a demonstration slot. The general checked his watch. Fine. 5 minutes at the end. It'll make for a good contrast. By late morning, the Atlas trials had gone exactly as scripted. The machine's precision was undeniable, and Westfield's confidence grew with each flawless shot. The dignitaries were already imagining procurement contracts, budget approvals, and the headlines that would follow. Then Meachum cleared his throat. Perhaps, sir, we could invite our observer to provide a comparative demonstration. Westfield's smile was thin. Of course. Always wise to remember our starting point. Lorre rose without a word, sliding the rifle into a battered leather pouch and slinging it over her shoulder. As she approached the firing platform, a few contractors exchanged smirks. One murmured something that made the others chuckle. Our observer, Westfield announced with theatrical indulgence, will demonstrate traditional long-range engagement, a baseline for appreciating Atlas's advancements. Lorre stepped up to the range control terminal and began entering data. Westfield glanced at the screen and stopped. Specialist, there must be an error, he said. The farthest target here is at 2.3 miles. I'm adjusting for a target at 4.18 miles, sir, she replied without looking up. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Westfield's voice hardened. There is no target at that distance. Colonel Meachum spoke quietly. There's a calibration marker about that far out. Part of the range infrastructure. Westfield hesitated, then gave a short nod. Very well. Proceed. But let the record show this exceeds the range of any conventional system. Lorre ignored the whispers as she unpacked her tools. A simple wind gauge carved from wood, a tarnished brass instrument, a few hand-cut paper tabs. No digital displays, no laser rangefinders. She worked with the calm precision of someone tuning a violin. One contractor muttered, "That thing belongs in a museum." Lorre didn't react. She sighted in, adjusted her stance, then stilled. The air around her seemed to tighten. For the record, Westfield told the audience, this attempt exceeds known limits by 40%. We are witnessing precisely the kind of failure Atlas was designed to eliminate. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to a single invisible line stretched between her and a dot beyond human sight. She exhaled. The shot cracked across the valley. 1 second. 2. 3. The crowd shifted, ready for the inevitable miss. At 7 seconds, the far-off speck on the horizon flared into sudden light and was gone. The technician's voice trembled. Impact confirmed on all systems. Target destroyed. Silence fell so thick it felt physical. Westfield stared at the monitors, his prepared speech dying in his throat. And somewhere behind the crowd, a low voice murmured a single word. Thistledown. The moment the target vaporized, the proving grounds changed. It wasn't the heat or the light. Those had been oppressive all morning, but the air itself. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter from earlier in the day now seemed impossibly distant, a sound from another lifetime. Men who spent their careers discussing kill ratios and acceptable collateral damage stood frozen, as if they'd just witnessed something they weren't cleared to comprehend. On the screen, the feed replayed the impossible shot from 3 angles. The calibration marker, a reinforced steel disc bolted into desert bedrock, came into crisp focus, then exploded into a white smear before the image washed out completely. Data overlays scrolled in red. Range, 4.18 miles. Wind, 26 kts cross. Temperature, 112 degrees Fahrenheit. Impact confirmed. A brigadier general older than Westfield stepped forward from the back, his silver hair catching alight. He stared at the replay, then at Lorre, who was calmly dismantling her rifle as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "It's her," he murmured, almost to himself. Thistledown. Meachum's voice followed, quiet but carrying. 7 confirmed impossible shots. 3 theaters. Damascus was you. Lorre gave a single, nonchalant nod. She returned the brass instrument to her pouch, wiped the barrel with a cloth, and slung the rifle without looking at anyone. Westfield found his voice. His pitch was sharper than before. This doesn't invalidate the Atlas system. One anomalous demonstration does not. But a deeper voice cut him off. A 4-star general stepped forward, the kind of man whose presence rearranged the gravity in a room. His name rarely left Pentagon walls. Now it carried across the stunned crowd. Specialist Thorne has been operating under special designation since 2016, he said. Her methods are classified above your clearance level, General. Westfield's jaw clenched. The contractors, who had been whispering earlier, now avoided eye contact. Their billion-dollar project suddenly reframed in the shadow of a woman with an antique rifle. Sir, one contractor ventured, Atlas is still. Not now, Westfield snapped, eyes locked on Lorre. The 4-star placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. We need to talk. About a situation. She nodded once. No salute, no questions. They walked away together, the crowd parting silently. Meachum leaned toward Westfield. Lunch, he asked, his tone unreadable. 15 minutes, Westfield muttered, striding toward the command center. Inside the climate-controlled conference room, Westfield paced like a caged animal. Who authorized her presence? He demanded. Major Farron, his aide, consulted his tablet. Paperwork came straight from the secretary's office. Listed as Standard Observer. Standard Observer? Westfield gave a humorless laugh. Do you know what thistledown is, Major? Farron hesitated. Rumors. Special operations. A specialized asset. Not specialized. Singular. Westfield stopped pacing. A ghost story in after-action reports. Impossible shots, unexplainable angles. Damascus. Sana'a. Mogadishu. He shook his head. But ghosts don't stroll into weapons trials, carrying rifles older than they are. Elsewhere in the facility, Lorre sat across from the 4-star in a secure briefing room. Between them lay a folder marked with classifications, so deep the number of people cleared to open it could be counted on 2 hands. You weren't supposed to reveal yourself, the general said, not angry, more weary. With respect, sir, I was invited to demonstrate. As a baseline comparison. Her voice was steady. Was I expected to miss? That might have been better. She tilted her head slightly. Better than proving your billion-dollar system isn't the only way forward. He exhaled. The situation I'm about to describe can't be solved by Atlas. Salem Albasher. Currently in a fortified compound. 3 meters of reinforced concrete. Surrounded by civilian structures. Lorre studied the photograph he slid across. Distance. Just under 5 miles from the nearest viable position. Wind. Variable desert crosswinds. 30 knots. She nodded, almost to herself. Atlas says it's impossible. He smiled faintly. It does. A shadow of amusement crossed her eyes. Seems to be a theme today. Back on the range, the afternoon demonstration resumed, but the atmosphere was wrong. Westfield delivered his lines, but the earlier swagger was gone. The applause was polite. Conversations hushed whenever eyes drifted toward the building where Lorre had vanished. The silver-haired senator approached Westfield afterward. Remarkable technology, General. Truly impressive. He paused. But I'm equally interested in what I witnessed this morning. An anomaly, Westfield replied. Exceptional marksmanship, but not scalable. Perhaps, the senator said. But anomalies have a way of changing history. Before Westfield could respond, Meachum appeared. Specialist Thorne has been recalled. Urgent assignment. The senator raised a brow. More urgent than briefing the head of appropriations. National security, Meachum said simply. The senator nodded slowly. Then perhaps another time. His gaze lingered on Westfield. Integration, General. Not replacement. Some tools don't go obsolete just because we invent something newer. Westfield waited until the senator was gone before turning on Meachum. You knew who she was. I suspected, Meachum replied evenly. I was in Damascus 3 years ago when a high-value target was eliminated through 2 feet of reinforced glass. The report said drone strike. Those of us there knew otherwise. And you didn't tell me. My clearance didn't allow it, Meachum said. Until today, I wasn't sure she was even one person. Westfield's jaw tightened. This complicates Atlas. Or, Meachum said, it refines it. In a secure hangar at the far end of the base, Lorre locked her rifle into a nondescript government vehicle. The four-star general watched, hands clasped behind his back. They're calling you something new, he said. She raised an eyebrow. The calibrator. She closed the trunk. After Damascus, someone said I don't just eliminate targets. I calibrate outcomes. One shot, one change, ripple effects across entire regions. Your grandfather taught you that? My grandfather taught me every bullet already knows where it wants to go. My job isn't to force it, but to help it get there. The general nodded. The briefing package is in the vehicle. You leave in 30 minutes. Yes, sir. He paused at the door. One more thing. Was today's demonstration necessary? Lorre met his eyes. Sometimes systems need calibration too. 3 weeks after the shot that stopped a desert full of mouths midward, the proving grounds no longer sounded like a showroom. They sounded like a workshop. Engineers spoke in verbs instead of slogans. Cables ran like vines between consoles. New code flashed and failed and flashed again. The Atlas platform, once displayed on a polished pedestal like a miracle in chrome, now sat on a maintenance stand with panels off, its guts exposed, diagnostic lights blinking like patient, unblinking eyes. General Harland Westfield stood amid the controlled chaos with a posture that had traded theater for concentration. He watched a cluster of technicians rerun a wind model modified only yesterday, modified being a polite word for cut down to half the assumptions and twice the humility. Integration test, extreme range set, an analyst said, not looking up from her console. Applying revised heuristic weighting. On the big screen, the simulation landscape resolved. A canyon scoured by heat, crosswinds twitching like live wire. Atlas tracked, paused, adjusted again, slower than before, almost hesitant. Acquisition time? Westfield asked. Higher, she said. But error margin just dropped 38%. A ripple of relief moved through the room. Colonel Atticus Meachum stepped in behind him, taking in the live data with a soldier's quick inventory. You've been busy, he said. Recalibrated. Westfield corrected softly. The word no longer tasted like defeat. Turns out we were overfitting the world to our math. We've pulled back the precision where it doesn't help and kept it where it does. Meachum studied a set of overlays, pressure microgradients, terrain heat lensing estimates, something new labeled HRES. Harmonic resonance. Westfield's mouth tilted. You heard her say too. She made it sound like a prayer, Meachum said. Or a warning. Westfield folded his arms. We're approximating the effect. Can't sense what she senses, but we can train the system to stop pretending it knows everything. The analyst lifted a hand. Run complete. Confidence, improvement confirmed. Extreme range, bias corrected. Westfield nodded once. Good. Log it. Move to field validation. Meachum waited until the screen cleared. Any word? Westfield knew what he meant. Came through this morning, he said. Target neutralized. Single round. 5.3 miles. Meachum let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Albashire. Officially, a structural anomaly resulting in catastrophic failure, Westfield said dryly. Unofficially? Thistledown, the general said, and for the first time since the day on the line, there was admiration in it. He turned back to the platform. And now she's coming here. Secretary wants a training unit stood up under my command. Hybrid doctrine. Her methods on top of our framework. Meachum arched an eyebrow. Under your command? The secretary believes I could benefit from exposure to alternative methodologies, Westfield replied, quoting without rolling his eyes. Apparently my worldview had edges. Edges can be sanded, Meachum said. Or sharpened, Westfield countered. But he smiled anyway. Lorre Thorne returned the way rumors do, quietly and already echoing. The convoy that brought her in was small and nondescript, a couple of gray sedans, and a plain SUV that looked like every other government vehicle on the continent. She stepped out wearing the same sun-bleached fatigues, the same boots, the same plain expression of someone who has made peace with being mistaken for ordinary. The only new thing was the eyes of everyone watching her, engineers, operators, the junior officers, pretending not to stare. The eyes carried a mixture of awe and skepticism, and a restless hope that the world might be bigger than the diagram said. In the main briefing room, a silver-haired admiral from the Joint Chiefs stood at the head of the table, hands on the back of a chair. A thick folder sat before him, flanked by schematics of Atlas and a leather roll of old brass and wood tools. General Westfield, the admiral said as Westfield and Meacham entered. Perfect timing. Specialist Thorne was explaining her methodology. Westfield didn't bristle at the phrasing. Not anymore. Admiral, he said evenly. We've been preparing integration pathways. Good, the admiral said. Because, as of this hour, Project Calibrator is authorized. General Westfield, you'll oversee the technical side. Specialist Thorne will build and lead a training cell. Our goal is a hybrid system, computational precision coupled with human intuition. Not one versus the other. Both. He turned to Lore. You have the floor. Lore unrolled the leather pouch with the care one might give to an heirloom instrument. The objects within were familiar to her hands, the brass sighting arc, the wind tabs, a carved wooden vane, smooth from time. She laid them next to an Atlas diagnostic printout, without apology and without reverence, as if to say, both are tools. The Atlas engine, she began, does something no human can. Hold 1,000 variables in perfect tension and adjust them in microseconds. But there are patterns we don't measure yet, microtextures in the air, the way heat breathes off rock and sand, the slight electromagnetic nudge when metal passes very fast through a living sky. Westfield couldn't help himself. Electromagnetic nudge? Call it whatever won't offend the equations, she said, almost smiling. What matters is the bullet isn't a passenger in the environment. It's a conversation with it. At certain distances, the conversation gets strange. The trick isn't forcing a path. It's recognizing the path that wants to happen and stepping aside. Stepping aside, the admiral said. Letting go of the inputs that do nothing but comfort us, Lore said, tapping a cluster of parameters on the Atlas sheet. At extreme range, false precision is a louder error than honest uncertainty. Westfield heard his own recent words echoed, overfitting the world to our math, and felt the small, bracing sting of recognition. He leaned in. So how do we teach that? We don't start with math, she said. We start with attention. She slid a single page across the table. At the top, in neat block letters, Calibrator, Initial Protocol. Beneath, 3 short lines. Listen before measuring. Feel before firing. Choose the natural path. Meacham's eyebrows flicked. That'll go over well in a place built on checklists. Then we'll keep the checklists, Lore said. But we'll change what they point at. The admiral glanced at Westfield. Objections. Only practical ones, Westfield said. We'll need a bridge, interfaces where intuition can be expressed in ways the system can ingest. Knobs, not just numbers. Then build them, the admiral said. You have authority for rapid prototyping. And General. Yes, sir. Make sure your people understand. This is not an apology for human error. It's an admission the world is wider than our sensors. Westfield nodded once. Understood. The first 6 candidates for Lore's cell arrived the next morning. A Navy sniper with ocean gray eyes and a surgeon's steady fingers. A Marine scout whose file was half commendations and half reprimands, as if the Corps couldn't decide whether to promote him or nail him to the deck. A quiet Army sergeant with a gift for reading terrain the way some read faces. A Ranger with a mathematician's degree and calluses that contradicted it. A Brit on exchange who spoke little and shot less. But when he did, everyone else watched. And a wiry Air Force tech whose unofficial job on deployment had been the one who fixes everything nobody understands. They sat around a U-shaped table, while Westfield outlined the official goals in crisp, military terms. They listened politely, eyes forward. Then Lore took the room, without raising her voice. You've all been the best in rooms like this, she said. What I'm going to ask you to do first is fail. A glance passed among them, curiosity, suspicion. You'll shoot with stripped data, she continued. No range calls, no ballistic apps. You'll walk the air with paper veins and a wetted fingertip. You'll learn to hear wind in things that don't make sound. After that, we'll bring the math back. Your job will be to tell the machine when to be brilliant and when to be quiet. The Marine raised a hand. Ma'am, with respect, how do we grade hearing wind? You don't grade it, Laurie said. You calibrate it. You test your guess against what the world chooses to do. The ranger with the degree smiled despite himself. Bayesian desert. Exactly, she said, and slid a battered field notebook down the table. Inside, neat rows of wind calls were annotated with small sketches of scrub, ripples and dust, the way a crow's flight stuttered at a ridgeline. The book smelled faintly of oil and sun. Westfield watched the faces as they turned the pages, skepticism ceding to interest to something hungrier. He felt a pang he hadn't expected. Envy, perhaps, of anyone encountering a new language and discovering they already knew a few words. By afternoon, prototypes were appearing like mushrooms after rain. A human input dial module clamped onto the Atlas console, allowing a shooter to weight or mute classes of variables with a tactile twist. A bias gate let operators flag an intuition, terrain lensing heavier than the model says, and watch the engine solution flex around it instead of steamroll it. An uncertainty meter stopped pretending every decimal was holy and displayed, in large, honest numerals, the size of the unknown. Feels like heresy, the Navy sniper said, turning the input dial with a reverent thumb. Feels like flying manual in a storm, the Brit replied, not looking up. Meachum drifted through the lab like a patient ghost, listening, learning. He found Westfield at a whiteboard covered with equations in one corner, and, in another, a simple sketch of a bullet moving through a stacked set of shimmering layers labeled heat, wind, harmonics, chance. New doctrine, he asked. New humility, Westfield said. Same mission. He tapped the word harmonics with the marker. I still hate this term. You don't have to love the word, Meachum said. You just have to build the knob. Westfield laughed under his breath. We're building the knob. At dusk, Laurie walked the range alone. Targets out to normal distances glowed under automatic lamps, obedient and bright. Beyond them, the desert became suggestion, and then rumor, and then a line of mountains gathering the last light. Somewhere out, there was a place 5 miles from a door in a city far from here, a place where a single round had found a single choice and rearranged a future no speech would acknowledge. Footsteps approached softly on gravel. Meachum stopped at her shoulder. They'll arrive at 0600, he said. You're 6. She nodded. Westfield's different, he added. He won't say it, but he is. He's remembering something, she said. What's that? That the most complicated weapon we ever built was a person, Laurie replied. Everything else is an accessory. Meachum handed her a folded sheet. He asked me to give you this. Draft of the hybrid doctrine. He wants your marks in red. She tucked it into her pocket. I'll bring a lot of red. They stood without speaking, listening to the desert cool. A night bird clicked once in the brush. Far out where the lamps ended, the darkness felt less like an absence than a depth. An ocean waiting for someone who knew how to swim without seeing. Tomorrow we start, Meachum said. No, Laurie answered, almost smiling. We already did. The day a machine learned to leave room for a human, and a human learned to share the trigger with the world. He let that settle. And if it doesn't take, if it turns out you can do it, but no one else can. Laurie looked toward the invisible horizon. Everything can be taught, she said, but not everything can be standardized. She started back toward the compound, boots whispering in the dust. Behind them, the range lights hummed, dutiful, certain. While beyond, in the hush where certainty failed, the future waited to be calibrated. At 0600, the range looked like a chalkboard, blank, expectant, and unforgiving. 6 candidates lined up at the berm, weapons grounded, eyes forward. Their rifles were familiar friends, precision bolts and tuned semis, glass so clean it felt like a sin to breathe on it. Beside each shooter, though, sat a small canvas kit unlike anything they'd signed for before. Paper vanes, a brass arc, a pocket magnifier scuffed by other hands, a stub of carpenter's pencil wrapped with twine. General Westfield stood a step back with Meachum, hands behind his back, every inch the officer. He let Lorre take the center. "We start with listening," she said, voice steady. "Everything else stacks on that. If you can't hear the range, you'll only ever be approximating what the machine already knows." The Marine, Calloway, couldn't help the sideways grin. "Ma'am, wind's not exactly chatty." "Then learn its accent," Lorre replied, and dropped a strip of tissue from shoulder height. It floated, stalled, and slid sideways in a way that made no sense to the eye. "Out there," she nodded toward distance, "you don't get wind. You get winds. Layers. Some push. Some pull. Some hum." The Brit, Roundtree, raised a brow. "You'll hear it," she said simply. "Not with ears." They spent the first hour not firing. That alone rattled a few cages. The Navy sniper, Rhea, took to the paper veins like she'd been waiting for an excuse to trust her fingertips again. The Ranger mathematician, Voss, built little cairns of pebbles at the firing line, watched the dusty skirts of heat lift off them like breaths. The sergeant, Torres, walked the scrub, knelt at a patch where ants skirted one side of a rock, but never the other. "Shade's colder," he said. "Shade is quieter," Lorre corrected. They did not touch handheld anemometers. When one candidate reached habit more than rebellion, Westfield cleared his throat just once. The hand withdrew. By 0800, the first drill began, 900 meters, then 1,200, then 1,000 again, but angled across a wash where heat boiled off a pale sand apron. Same distance, different answer. Each had to write their call before firing, no backfilling, no post facto genius. They taped the calls to the stock with the pencil twine, so the rifle carried their notes like a reminder or a dare. Calloway sent the first round too clean and too fast. The steel rang low and left with a sting that felt like embarrassment. He adjusted by math, then overshot high right, cursing under his breath. "Walk it," Lorre said. "What's walk it?" He stopped. She was already stepping sideways, 10 paces, then another 5. "You want me to change the shot box?" "I want you to change the conversation," she answered. "Wind's pinching here. Loosens where that scrub thins. Don't bully it. Bypass it." He muttered something, but shouldered up and fired from a new spot. The plate chimed dead center. He blinked, annoyed and impressed in equal parts. "Luck," he said, testing her. "Probability with manners," she said, moving down the line. Roundtree's groupings were close to elegant, but he was late to break. He drank too long from the sight picture, trying to make it perfect. Lorre slid a card beneath his cheek weld. Good enough. He chuckled once, clipped, and on the next run his shot broke in rhythm with a ripple across scrub he hadn't noticed until the card made space for noticing. Voss overtrusted a mirage line that was honest at 900, but lying at 1,200. He admitted it without drama, made a note, and became the first to sketch the distortion as a series of stacked glass panes. "You're drawing music," Lorre said, and he didn't disagree. Rhea was the first to anticipate a gust by nothing anyone else could name. Her round kissed steel, while 3 others waited and missed. She glanced at Lorre without triumph. "What gave it away?" Lorre asked. 2 flies, Rhea said, still on glass. They veered together, like they hit the same invisible wall. She flushed. "Sounds stupid out loud." "It sounds like attention," Lorre said. By 1,000, tempers frayed. The Air Force tech, Cade, wanted numbers. He could build a clock from wire and sand if you gave him a battery and boredom, and he hated the idea that feeling might outrun measuring. Lorre handed him the brass arc. "Give it grief," she said. He did, called it imprecise, antique, poetic nonsense. Then he set it against a stake line, watched its tiny shadow crawl, did math under his breath, and finally nodded as if conceding a chess tactic he'd never seen. "It's not right," he said, almost grudging, "but it's right enough fast." "That's the point," Westfield murmured near Meachum. "Right enough fast." Meachum didn't answer. He was watching Lorre's face when she taught, how she never corrected posture with her hands, never grabbed a rifle, never took a shot to show them how it should look. She asked instead, what did the dust say? What did the heat do there? If the wind were a river, where's the eddy? By noon, the candidates were sunburned and thirsty, and ready to shoot something that bled. Lorray surprised them. She wheeled out a decommissioned drone target, a foamed composite bird with a belly full of chalk and a series of limp pennants stitched along its wings. Velocity trap, she said. The flags lie at speed. You'll be tempted to read them. Don't. The drone rose humming, banked into the crosswind, and the flags indeed told a false tale, fluttering with drama where the air was tame, lazily drooping where it was treacherous. Rhea laughed involuntarily when she caught the trick. Calloway swore. Atlas would ignore the flags, Westfield said, half to himself. Atlas never had eyes, Lorray said. He didn't bristle. We're giving it ears, he replied, and tilted his head toward the lab. Afternoon bled into workshop time. The knobs came back from the machine shop in a raw aluminum first cut, beautiful in their ugliness. Cade bolted one onto the console, solder iron flickering. Voss suggested a detent at midline, zero bias, that could be felt with gloves. Roundtree preferred a dial that offered mild resistance, like pushing through soft brush. Nothing was arbitrary. Every tactile choice pointed at a mental model. They ran proof-of-concept sets. Candidates would spin the terrain lensing wheel up one notch, just one, and the Atlas solution would tilt a hair, enough to see, not enough to dominate. Turn harmonics down, and system confidence would drop honestly rather than pretending certainty. Press a new button labeled Human Mark and a brief overlay would display. Operator asserts. Gust onset in 3 to 5 seconds. Sector 2R. The engine didn't bow, it listened. Feels like we're teaching the machine to shrug, Cade said, surprised to find he didn't hate it. Feels like we're teaching it to converse, Westfield countered, then caught himself using Lorray's word and pretended not to notice. At 1700, a senator's motorcade dusted the horizon, uninvited and unavoidable. The silver-haired man from the demonstration stepped out with a staffer and a smile that had less certainty than before. General, he said, shaking Westfield's hand. I heard whispers of a program with a name I rather like. Project Calibrator. Westfield said. Work in progress. The senator's gaze slid to the candidates, to Lorray, to the crude dials and paper veins. It looks less expensive than I expected. That's the expensive part, Meacham said, nodding at the shooters. Everything else is an adapter. They walked him through a controlled evaluation. 2 simultaneous targets at 1,800 meters across differing terrain. One team ran pure Atlas baseline. The other, the hybrid same engine, but with a single human mark and 2 light dial nudges. The baseline hit once and clipped once. The hybrid team, slower by a breath, hit twice. Small sample size, the senator said, but quietly, as if caution were good manners. Day 1, Westfield agreed. But you asked about integration. This is what it looks like. The senator watched Lorray confer with Rhea and Voss. There was no mystique in the way she spoke, no theatrics. She nodded when they were right, nodded when they were wrong, and nodded when they weren't sure. He looked almost relieved. I'd like a briefing in D.C., he said. With candor. You'll get it, Westfield said, and meant it. Evening cooled the range to something human again. The candidates sprawled in the shade of a Hesco wall, passing a jug, trading the first day's barbs. Calloway had already turned his initial embarrassment into a joke. Roundtree whittled at a twig with neat, unnecessary precision. Rhea sat alone for a minute, eyes shut, palms open like she was holding an invisible bowl. Lorray took a seat on the berm, a few yards off. Meacham joined her with 2 tin cups of coffee that tasted like patience and grit. How much do you tell them? He asked. As much as they can use, she said. And the rest? Waits until it becomes true for them. He sipped. That a grandfather line? He taught me to teach, she said. He also taught me to shut up. They sat in companionable quiet until Westfield approached, a folio under his arm. He didn't loom. He didn't command the ground. He just stood there, a man with a question. I'd like to schedule a night evolution, he said. Mirage gone air heavier. teach the machine what we learn in dark. Tonight, Lorre asked. He hesitated. If you approve. She lifted a shoulder. The desert approves or not? We'll ask it. At 2100, under skies so thick with stars it felt like being inside the dome of a cathedral, they set steel at odd intervals and angles, some behind thin scrub, some on bare exposure, one tucked into the shoulder of a dry arroyo where cold air pooled like water. The candidates took positions, spread wide. Atlas ran in low-lumen mode, dials lit with a hush of glow paint. Headlamps were banned, flashlights taped red for map reading only. Night wind is a liar of a different stripe. It comes from above, not across, sliding off cooling rock like breath from a sleeping giant. It pools, eddies, then vanishes, leaving the memory of movement like a rumor. Rhea called the first shot on a target no one could see with naked eye, only sense as absence, where stars at a gap. She pressed human mark, downdraft pulse, counted softly, and broke. Steele answered, soft and certain. Calloway missed twice, then made an adjustment that wasn't an adjustment. He lowered his shoulders, relaxed the death grip, and let the rifle rest like a living thing. Stop making it obey, Lorre whispered near him. His third round was true. Roundtree read the arroyos cold not by air on his cheek, but by the way the grass barely moved at ankle height, while a moth zigzagged like a drunk at eye level. He dialed a single click on terrain, lensing, and smiled to himself in the dark when the engine's solution shifted just enough to land. Westfield stood between consoles, hand hovering over the new controls the way a pilot keeps fingertips near throttles on approach. He did not touch. He watched the operators touch. And he listened to the clicks, to the calls, to the silence between. By midnight, the 100-yard corrections and the 1,000-yard truths began to braid. The hybrid runs logged quietly better hits than baseline across the board. Not perfect. Nothing perfect. But the graphs trended in a way that made engineers straighten and soldiers unclench. Kate tapped a screen and whistled low. We're not faster, he said, but we're less wrong. Less wrong is the road to right, Voss murmured. Lorre walked the line, collecting the taped wind notes, the pencil-scribbled sketches of shadows, the small admissions of doubt. She slid them into her pocket as if each were a coin. When she reached Westfield, he surprised her by offering the folio. Hybrid Doctrine Rev 2, he said. I kept your 3 lines at the top. She opened it. There they were, unchanged. Listen before measuring. Feel before firing. Choose the natural path. Beneath, in Westfield's blocky hand, a 4th line had been added. Let the system admit what it does not know. She looked up. That one's yours. I stole it from the desert, he said, almost smiling. The stars drew down closer, or maybe eyes widened enough to meet them. Night pressed cool palms against sunburnt cheeks. Somewhere far beyond the lit steel and measured arcs, an old target still stood shattered, a memory and a warning. Tomorrow, Meachum asked, stepping up, not wanting to break whatever had just settled over them, and knowing he must. More of the same, Lorre said. And less of it. He blinked. Less. Fewer words. Fewer knobs. Fewer lies. She nodded at the range. We're teaching them a language. The second day is when you stop translating. They powered down in stages until only the glow paint remained. Little rings in the night like attentive eyes. The candidates packed quietly, laughter muted, movement soft. Nobody wanted to speak too loud in case the wind decided to change its mind. On the walk back, Calloway fell into step with Lorre. Ma'am, he said, awkward and sincere. Today felt like being told the ocean has a current under the current. It does, she said. How far down? As far as you can stand to listen, she answered. Behind them, Westfield lingered with the consoles, one hand resting lightly on the human mark button, as if it were a bell rope in a chapel. He didn't press it. He only stood there long enough to feel the quiet settle into the machine and the machine settle into him. The desert breathed. The program breathed with it. And somewhere, past the range and the graphs and the doctrine in its leather folder, tomorrow gathered itself like a shot no one could yet see. Already on its way. By the 3rd week, the hybrid cell was no longer a novelty. The 6 candidates moved with an ease that suggested they'd begun to think in the new language. They no longer reached instinctively for digital readouts first. They read the ground before they read the data. The knobs on Atlas were no longer curiosities. They were extensions of thought, subtle as the flex of a trigger finger. General Westfield watched from the perimeter, arms folded. He'd stopped narrating their progress for visiting brass. The work no longer needed theatrics. The graphs spoke for themselves, hit rates trending upward at extreme ranges, even under deliberately chaotic conditions. But numbers weren't the whole of it. What impressed him more was the way the operators looked when they worked. Less tense, more fluid, like a river finding its bed. Lorraine Thorne moved between them quietly, offering adjustments in murmurs and hand signals. She rarely touched a rifle, but when she did, it was to adjust a stock angle by a thumb's width or rotate a shooter's elbow a fraction, micro-corrections that Atlas could not yet model. The candidates responded without hesitation. She had earned their trust without ever asking for it. The day's exercise began with a twist. Simultaneous moving targets at varied ranges, some in open sun, others under intermittent cloud cover. Half the cell ran baseline Atlas. The other half, hybrid mode. Meachum observed from the control station. "They're pushing complexity early," he said. "They're ready," Lorraine replied, not looking at him. The Navy sniper, Rhea, was first to fire, timing her break with the shadow of a passing cloud, anticipating the cooling drop in air density. Her round landed dead center before the Atlas baseline team had finished its calculation sequence. Calloway went second, catching a side target moving through a heat shimmer. He used a single human mark, lensing heavier than model predicts, and let the system bend to him instead of the other way around. Voss overcompensated on his first run, then dialed back harmonics, and trusted the mirage instead of the math. Hit. The Brit, Roundtree, added a mid-run correction for wind shear after spotting a hawk tilt unnaturally at altitude. "Bird told me," he muttered afterward, but the hit was recorded without comment. By the final sequence, even Cade, the skeptic, was running the dials without self-consciousness. "It's like coaxing it," he said, almost to himself. "Not driving, not following, coaxing." Westfield joined Lorraine as the candidates broke for water. "They're adapting faster than I expected," he admitted. "They're remembering," she said. "Remembering what?" "That they're part of the environment, not separate from it." He nodded, considering. "Atlas doesn't remember anything. It only records. That's why you still need them," she said simply. That evening, a message came through secure channels. A live trial, real-world parameters. No formal operation, just a scenario constructed from satellite imagery and weather data. "Targets in the training grounds?" Meachum asked. "No," Westfield said. "Targets in Utah." The room stilled. "A test shot," Westfield clarified. "No live round, training projectile only. But the distance is 4.6 miles. Mountain terrain. Crosswinds over 30 knots. Atlas baseline calculated 98% probability of miss." He looked at Lorraine. "We're running a hybrid. Pre-dawn, they set up on a ridgeline east of the range. The training projectile would mark impact, with a dye burst visible to drone surveillance. The Utah target was a thermal decoy on a bluff beyond 3 separate wind systems. The hybrid shooter would be chosen at random." Westfield drew the slip, Rhea. She checked her rifle with the calm of someone boarding a familiar train. Lorraine crouched beside her, saying little. The others stood back, silent. Atlas fed its calculation. Elevation correction plus 2.3 mils. Wind correction minus 1.8 mils. Rhea studied the screen, then dialed harmonics up 1 notch. Terrain lensing down half. She added a human mark. Gust onset 4 seconds after break. Minor rotational eddy left or right. The system recalculated. New probability, 61%. Still far from certain. She breathed, settled, broke the shot. The control feed showed the projectile's arc vanish into haze. Seconds stretched. 4, 5, 6. At 7, a plume of bright orange dye erupted against the Utah bluff. Silence, then quiet applause. Not for show, but for recognition. Training projectile, Meachum said. But that was a kill. Correction, Westfield said. That was a calibration. Lorre only nodded once. 2 days later, the senator returned, this time with 2 aides and a notepad full of questions. He watched the playback twice, asked about cost ratios, deployment timelines, operator training hours. And if Specialist Thorne is unavailable, he asked finally. Westfield gestured toward the candidates drilling in the distance. Then one of them takes the shot. The senator studied him. You're sure they'll be ready? They'll never be finished, Lorre said, stepping in. Neither will Atlas. That's the point. It's not a product. It's a conversation we keep having. Night came early that day, clouds closing in over the desert. The candidates stayed on the range, running wind drills by feel. Atlas's dials glowed softly in the dark, a quiet chorus of human and machine learning each other's accents. From the perimeter, Westfield watched, hands in his pockets. Meachum joined him. You've changed, Meachum said. I've listened, Westfield replied. Turns out that's harder than calculating. They stood in silence a while longer. Out on the range, a steel plate rang, sharp and true, against the wind. Lorre stayed behind after the others left, walking to the farthest target line until the floodlights thinned. She stopped, looking out past the range into the kind of dark where distance becomes meaningless. Somewhere out there, future targets waited, beyond the reach of charts, beyond the edge of probability. She rested her hand on the rifle's worn stock, feeling the smooth grain under her fingers. Her grandfather's voice came to her, as it always did in these moments. Every bullet already knows where it wants to go. She smiled faintly. The wind shifted, just enough to notice. All right, she said to the dark. Let's find your path. And she started back toward the light.